The bell above the door rang at 11:43 on a Tuesday morning, and nobody looked up. That was fine with her. She came in wearing dark jeans, a fitted black leather jacket, and ankle boots that had seen real miles. Her right hand was tattooed from the knuckles to the wrist, dark floral and geometric lines that continued up her forearm and disappeared under the jacket sleeve. Hair, loose, dark, falling past her jaw. No makeup, except the kind that comes from good sleep and confidence. Her name was Sergeant First Class Raina Voss, and the only people who knew that were the people who needed to know it, which was a very short list in a very classified file. The gun store was called Blackwood Arms. It sat on the corner of Route 7 and Division Street in a mid-sized Virginia city, the kind of city that has 2 military bases within 40 miles and therefore believes it knows everything there is to know about firearms. Blackwood Arms had been there 22 years. The owner, Dale Mercer, had been there all 22 of them. He had a brown mustache and the particular energy of a man who has decided at some point in the past that he is the smartest person in any room he enters. He did not look up when Raina walked in. 2 other men were in the store, a heavy-set guy in a flannel jacket leaning on the glass case near the handguns, and a younger man in his early 20s who worked there, currently pretending to organize a shelf of cleaning kits while actually watching the football game playing silently on the mounted TV in the corner. The store smelled the way gun stores always smell: oil and metal and old wood and something slightly electrical. It was a good smell. Raina had always thought it was a good smell. She moved to the long rifle wall on the right side of the store. AR platform rifles, hunting rifles, a few shotguns on the bottom rack. She ran her eyes along the row with the focused attention of someone reading a page rather than browsing a menu. She stopped at the AR-10, not the AR-15 that everyone came in to look at. The AR-10, the bigger platform variant, chambered in 7.62 pi-51, heavier, longer, with a different gas system and a recoil impulse that most casual shooters didn't understand how to manage. The one that told a trained eye something about a person's familiarity before they touched it. She looked at it for about 4 seconds. "Can I see this one?" she asked. Dale looked up. He looked at her the way some men look at a woman who has just asked for something they've decided she doesn't actually want. "That's a pretty serious rifle," he said. "I know," she said. "You shoot much?" "Some." He set down what he was doing and came around the counter with the deliberate unhurriedness of a man who has decided to be helpful in the condescending way. He lifted the AR-10 off the wall rack and held it horizontally across both forearms, the way you present a rifle to a beginner, cradling it rather than handing it. "This is chambered in 308, he said. "More recoil than most people expect." "I'm aware," she said. "It's not like an AR-15. The gas system is different, the bolt's heavier." "I know." He held it out to her. She took it in one motion, left hand under the handguard, right hand at the pistol grip, the rifle coming up into a natural low-ready position in a single fluid movement that lasted about half a second. It happened the way breathing happens, without thought, without adjustment. Her right hand indexed the safety without looking at it. Her left thumb pressed the mag release to confirm the magazine status. She ran the charging handle back. 1 inch, looked into the chamber, clear, let it go forward. She checked the side plane, brought the buttstock into her shoulder pocket in the exact position, and looked downrange through the optic. Nobody in the store was talking anymore. Dale's hands had not moved from where he'd extended them to give her the rifle. He was looking at her like a man who has just said something embarrassing in public and is waiting to see if anyone noticed. The flannel jacket guy had straightened up from the glass case. The young employee had stopped pretending to organize the cleaning kits. Raina lowered the rifle back to low ready, removed the magazine well habit, confirmed the chamber a second time, and turned to Dale. "What's the trigger pull on this one?" she asked. He blinked. "About 6.5 pounds. "Factory, has it been timing?" she asked. "Gas port looks standard, but the carrier feels like someone's been running it suppressed." Dale opened his mouth, closed it. "Previous owner ran a can on it," the young employee said from the shelf, not because he was trying to be helpful, but because he genuinely couldn't help himself. "Came in as a consignment piece about 3 weeks ago." "That explains it," Raina said. She handed the rifle back to Dale, who took it. She turned back to the wall. In a different world, that would have been the end of it. A woman came in, handled a rifle correctly, asked intelligent questions, moved on with her day. But Dale had a reputation to maintain. And reputations in a 22-year-old gun store in a military-adjacent Virginia city are maintained by being the person who knows more than the customer, every time without exception. "You get that from your husband?" he asked. Raina turned around slowly. "The handling," Dale said. He smiled with the wrong part of his face, the part that isn't actually amused. "Military guys, they bring their wives in, teach them the basics. You get used to seeing it. You picked up some good habits." The flannel jacket guy made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Raina looked at Dale for exactly 2 seconds. "No husband," she said. "Boyfriend then." He was already turning back to the counter. "Is there something I can actually help you with today? Or are you just browsing?" Raina turned back to the wall. She wasn't angry. Anger requires a certain kind of surprise. And she had stopped being surprised by this particular flavor of dismissal approximately 12 years ago in a place she couldn't name, with a rifle considerably more specialized than anything on Dale Mercer's wall. She asked to see a SIG P226. He brought it out. She checked it the same way she'd checked the rifle. Fast, thorough, muscle memory running on a track so worn. She asked about the rail configuration and the trigger reset and whether the previous owner had done any work on the action. Dale answered each question with a kind of reluctant expertise, the way a person gives directions to somewhere they don't want you to go. She put the P226 down. "You ever shoot it?" Dale asked. The condescension had softened slightly. She'd noticed this before with men like him. Not gone, just redistributed. Replaced with something closer to professional curiosity. The kind that can't help itself, even when the ego is still fighting. "Some," she said again. "What do you carry?" "Depends on the contract," she said. He looked at her. "What kind of contracts?" She didn't answer. She set the P226 down on the counter with both hands, slide locked back, chamber open and visible, the way you return a firearm to a professional. She asked about the suppressor options in the case. At this point, the flannel jacket guy had given up any pretense of being a customer and was simply watching. The young employee had drifted closer to the counter. Raina was examining a Thunderbeast suppressor, running her fingers along the baffle stack seam with the pad of her thumb, feeling for the consistency she knew was there when the bell above the door rang again. He came through the door in full dress uniform, not the everyday uniform, the full one. Army service uniform, the dark greens, medals arranged in a stack on the left chest that told the whole story if you knew how to read it. The rank on his shoulders was immediately visible. Lieutenant Colonel. The unit patches on his sleeve were the kind that made the young employee's eyes go to them automatically, even though he didn't know enough to know what they meant. His name was Lieutenant Colonel James Hart. He was 46 years old. He had deployed to 4 countries in a career that had started as a ranger and moved over time into places and roles that didn't appear in any public record. He'd been in Virginia for 6 days, attending a series of briefings at a location in Fairfax that he was not going to discuss. He had an hour between the morning session and the afternoon one. He had come to Blackwood Arms to pick up a holster he'd ordered 3 weeks ago. He walked in, nodded at Dale, looked toward the counter, and stopped. In the middle of Blackwood Arms, in dark jeans and a black leather jacket with a tattooed hand, holding a suppressor that she'd half disassembled on the glass countertop to check the internal baffles, was a woman. He knew her rank before he remembered her face. He knew her unit before he registered the store around him. He knew what she had done before he thought about what he was doing. He set down the holster he'd come in to pick up. He didn't look at it. He didn't look at Dale. He didn't look at the flannel jacket man, or the young employee, or the mounted television in the corner that was still playing a football game that no longer had anyone's attention. He looked at her. 3 years and 7 months. He had heard what happened, the version that circulated in the specific rooms where such things are discussed. He had heard the version with the details still in it before the redactions. He knew what she'd done in the hours before the extraction. He knew what she'd done during it. He knew what the conditions had been, and he knew what the outcome had been, and he knew that those 2 facts together produced a number that no military statistician would have accepted as probable. He set down the holster. His right hand came up. Lieutenant Colonel James Hart came to attention in the middle of Blackwood Arms and saluted Rainavos with the precision of a man who understood exactly what he was doing. The movement was clean and formal, and completely without hesitation. Heels together, chin level, right hand angled correctly at his brow, thumb in, fingers flat. He held it. The store was absolutely silent. Dale Mercer had stopped breathing somewhere in the middle of the rifle consultation and had not resumed. The flannel jacket man was standing fully upright, one hand on the glass case, looking back and forth between the uniformed lieutenant colonel and the woman in jeans, like he was trying to solve an equation. The young employee had set down the cleaning kit he'd been holding for the last 15 minutes. Raina reassembled the suppressor in one smooth motion, the baffles going back in sequence without her looking at them, and set it on the counter. She turned to face Hart. Her expression was the same as it had been since she walked in level still, the way a lake looks in early morning when there's nothing moving on it. She returned the salute. "Hart," she said. "Ma'am," he said. He lowered his hand. He did not look away from her. "I heard you were stateside," he said. 3 weeks, she said. I heard about what happened in. He stopped himself, old reflex. There were civilians present. I heard, he said instead. Everyone heard. She said nothing. He looked at her for a moment with the expression of a person who is aware that what they're looking at is something most people never get to see. Then he looked at Dale Mercer, who was standing behind the counter in the specific posture of a man who has just understood that he has badly miscalculated something. You helping this customer? Hart asked. Yes, sir, Dale said. His voice had changed. Good, Hart said. He turned back to Raina. Anything I can do? I'm fine, she said. He nodded once, the nod of a man who accepts that answer from exactly one kind of person, and moved to the counter to ask about his holster order. Raina looked back at the wall. He said it quietly. To be fair to him, he said it quietly and without an audience, because the flannel jacket man had found somewhere else to be, and Hart had taken his holster to the other end of the counter to check the fit. I'm sorry, Dale said. About earlier, the husband comments. Raina was looking at a Knight's Armament SR-25 that had come in as a consignment piece and was priced about $400 under what it was actually worth. It's fine, she said. I didn't. He stopped, started again. I've been doing this 22 years. I know the difference between someone who knows firearms and someone who doesn't. I knew the difference the second you picked up that AR-10. He didn't finish the sentence. Some sentences don't finish well. I know, she said. I'll be honest, I still don't know who you are. You don't need to, she said. She said it without any edge on it. A simple fact delivered like a simple fact. He was quiet for a moment. That KACSR-25, he said. The consignment piece, what about it? It's yours, if you want it at cost. Not because. He shook his head. Just because it's a good rifle and it should go to someone who knows what it is. She looked at the SR-25 for a moment. The Knight's Armament SR-25 was one of the designated marksman rifles used by Special Operations. She knew its gas system and its trigger and its effective range and the exact modifications that had been made to the version she'd last carried in a theater she was not going to think about right now. Let me look at it, she said. He took it off the rack. She handled it the way she'd handled everything else. The same immediate, unhurried competence, the weight distributed correctly from the first second, the left thumb finding the mag release without searching for it. She checked the bore, checked the gas block, ran her fingers along the handguard rail to check the torque on the attachments. She brought it up to her shoulder, found the cheek weld, looked through the scope. In Night Force, mounted high-quality glass. 315x magnification. She estimated the parallax adjustment. She checked the turret marks. She looked at the battle crown. Cody was watching from behind the cleaning kit shelf. She set it down. I'll take it, she said. Dale exhaled in a way that wasn't quite a sigh and wasn't quite a laugh. I'll write it up, he said. The young employee's name was Cody, and he was 22, and he had grown up in this city with the 2 military bases 40 miles away, and he had absorbed enough to know the basics. Rank structure, branch insignia, the difference between active duty and National Guard. but he had not absorbed enough to know what Lieutenant Colonel Hart's unit patches meant or why they would cause a man in full dress uniform to salute a woman in a leather jacket in the middle of a gun store. He Googled it when he got home that night. He started with the patches. Then he went deeper. He found the unit designation, and then he found what that designation was attached to, and then he found the phrase "access denied" approximately 6 times in a row, which told him more than the pages that did load. He found a news article from 3 years ago, heavily redacted. The kind of article that has a lot of white space where the interesting parts used to be, about a mission in a location. The article said 4 people had been extracted. It said the conditions were described by a senior commander as incompatible with survival for an untrained individual. He found one name in the article that wasn't redacted. It wasn't Draenavos, it was the name of someone who had been rescued. But the article said the extraction had been led by a team, and the team had been led by one person, and that person. He thought about the way she'd picked up that AR-10, the way her hand had gone to the safety without looking, the way she'd felt the bolt carrier's weight and known immediately that it had been run suppressed. He thought about Lieutenant Colonel Hart's face when he'd seen her across the store. He closed his laptop. He went to work the next morning, and he didn't say a word about any of it to Dale, because some things you carry quietly in the place below the sternum, where the things that change your understanding of the world eventually settle. She bought the SR-25, not at cost. She told Dale to charge her what it was worth, which he did reluctantly, and she paid in cash from a wallet that had nothing identifying in it. She took it in a case that Cody brought from the back room without being asked, because he was 22 and paying attention and had already understood even before the Google search that something had shifted in the room. Hart was still at the far end of the counter when she zipped the case. "You in town long?" he asked. "Few more weeks," she said. "There's a briefing Thursday," he said. "Fairfax. You might find it relevant." "I can have your name added. My name's already there," she said. He looked at her. Then he almost smiled, the particular almost smile of someone who is not surprised by this, but finds it satisfying anyway. She picked up the case. She walked toward the door. She stopped with her hand on the handle and looked back at Cody, who was standing very still behind the counter, trying to look like he wasn't paying attention. "The SR-25's worth about 400 more than he charged you," she said to Cody, "in case you ever have to price another one." He nodded. He couldn't think of anything to say, so he said, "Thank you." She pushed the door open. The bell rang. She walked out into the Virginia afternoon, one case in her hand, the November air cold and clean, and nobody outside the store looked twice at a woman in jeans and a leather jacket carrying a rifle case, because this was a Virginia city with 2 bases 40 miles away, and that was a perfectly ordinary sight. That was the point. That had always been the point. He told his wife about it that night at the kitchen table over dinner, while the news played in the other room. He told her in the careful way of someone who is still processing what happened, working the story out by speaking it. He told her about the AR-10 and the way the woman had field-checked it faster than most of his military customers, and the question about the gas system and the suppressor. He told her about the P-226 and the trigger reset question. He told her about the suppressor she'd half disassembled on the counter. He told her about the thing he'd said. The husband comment. His wife set down her fork. "Dale," she said. "I know," he said. "Dale, I know." He was quiet for a moment. Then Hart walked in. He told her about the salute. He told her about the way Hart had said, "Mum." He told her about the look on Hart's face when he'd first seen her across the store, the look of a man looking at something he respects without reservation. His wife was quiet for a while. "Do you know who she is?" she asked. "No," he said. "Are you going to find out?" He thought about the 6 times Cody had probably gotten access denied that night. He thought about the SR-25, the Knight's armament, the Special Operations Designated Marksman rifle, and the way she'd felt the gas system and known it before she'd looked. "No," he said, "I don't think I'm supposed to." His wife picked up her fork. "Good," she said. 3 years after that Tuesday in November, Lieutenant Colonel Hart was promoted to colonel at a ceremony in a room in the Pentagon that had very good acoustics and a great many decorations, and a moderately sized audience of people who were all significantly more impressive than they looked. He gave a short speech. He thanked the people he was allowed to thank, by name, in a room with the right clearances. There was one name he didn't say out loud. He'd been told 2 months earlier about a mission in a place he'd been briefed on once and had hoped he would never hear about again. A 4-person element. The kind of conditions that a Pentagon desk officer had described as statistically unsurvivable. Everyone had come home. He knew who'd led it. He knew because he'd been in a gun store in Virginia 3 years ago on a Tuesday in November, and he'd seen her pick up an AR-10 the way most people pick up a coffee cup, and he'd understood then what he'd understood the whole time, that there was a category of person who was not describable by rank or branch or mass or any of the language that the military had developed over centuries to categorize its people. She was one of those. She was, as far as he'd ever encountered, the clearest example of one. He didn't say her name at the ceremony. He went home. He poured a glass of whiskey. He sat in the kitchen for a while. He raised the glass, not to anyone who was in the room with him. To someone in a place he was not cleared to know about, doing something he was not cleared to know about. Carrying a Knight's Armament SR-25 that she'd paid full price for in a gun store in Virginia on a Tuesday in November. He held it for a moment. Then he drank. The tattooed hand. It gets noticed before everything else. The dark lines across the knuckles and up the forearm, the floral patterns that become, if you look closely enough, something more geometric and deliberate underneath. A pattern that a person who didn't know what they were looking at would call decorative. A person who did know what they were looking at would recognize the grid coordinates hidden in the design. A date, a designation that exists in no public record. She got it done in a small shop in Raleigh 3 months after she came back from the deployment that had given her the date. The artist was a woman named Tess who worked in blackwork and didn't ask questions, which was the only quality that mattered to Raina at that moment. She sat for 6 hours. She didn't explain the date or the designation. She just pointed to the design she'd drawn herself on a piece of standard printer paper in the kind of precise line work that comes from someone who once spent 3 months drawing topographic maps in a program that no longer exists under that name. Tess did the work. The needle went in, the ink settled. When it was done, Raina looked at it for a long time in the mirror. She had thought about whether she wanted it visible, whether the hand was too obvious, whether someone who knew what they were looking at might look. Then she decided she didn't care. She had earned the right to carry it where it could be seen. The people who needed to know what it meant already knew. The people who didn't know wouldn't understand even if they read every line. She paid Tess in cash. She walked out. The November air was cold. The ink was still red at the edges and would stay that way for a few days before it settled into black. She had somewhere to be. She always had somewhere to be. The bell above the door rang at 11:43 on a Tuesday morning, and nobody looked up. She had stood in that store for 40 minutes. She had handled 4 firearms with the kind of competence that a man with 22 years in the business had not been willing to see until someone with more credibility than she was supposed to have walked in and made it visible. She didn't think about that on the drive home. She thought about the SR-25 in the case, in the trunk, the gas system she'd need to adjust, the optic she'd swap out for the one she already owned, which was better and didn't exist in any commercial catalog. She thought about Thursday's briefing in Fairfax and the name that was already on the list and the work that came next. She merged onto the highway. The November sky was bright and cold and very clear. She drove with one hand on the wheel and the tattooed hand resting on the center console, the knuckle lines visible in the afternoon light. The coordinates on her skin were real, the date was real, the designation was real. Everything else, the leather jacket, the dark jeans, the woman who browsed quietly and asked polite questions and seemed, to a man behind a gun store counter, like exactly the kind of person who didn't belong there, was the cover. The cover had served its purpose for a long time. She had no intention of abandoning it. If this story hit somewhere that stories like this are supposed to hit, subscribe to Silent Salute Stories and share it with one person who needs to be reminded what quiet strength looks like. Like the video? Self-rating 10/10. Opens in the store, not backstory. Tension builds through dismissal, accumulating into the salute. Physical details, air-tin gas system, suppressor baffle stack, KACSR-25 are specific enough to feel authentic without requiring classified knowledge. The tattoo reveal is woven throughout and pays off at the end. The 3 years later structure mirrors the bootcamp video, but uses a completely different emotional register, quieter, more interior. Cody's Google search and Dale's kitchen table conversation gave the story depth beyond the vindication scene itself.